Palestine is a reliable partner for peace, if peace is the objective. Palestine is a reliable partner for peace, if peace is the objective. The whole world can testify to that. But the Israeli government's objective is not peace, it is domination. Netanyahu yet again bragged that he will never allow a Palestinian state to emerge. He went further, reaffirming Israel will retain control from the river to the sea, promising eternal occupation, a delusional idea that will continue depriving our region of the prospects and promise of peace. Mr. President, the Palestinian people have an inalienable right to self-determination, including the right to the independence of their state. Any implementation of peace plans must be uphold this right fully and unequivocally, and must preserve the unity and territorial integrity of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. There must be no administrative or legal, or I should rather say illegal, measures that entrench division and occupation instead of bringing an end to them. Mr. President, the best way to consolidate the ceasefire is to move towards a just peace.
Today, for the first time in 843 days, I sit in this chamber without the yellow hostage pin on my lapel. Everyone in Israel wore it, until yesterday. This is a moment of deep national significance for Israel. This moment also carries a message far beyond Israel. Western liberal democracies do not cave to terrorists. They do not reward mass murder. They do not trade their values for silence. The message is clear for every terrorist organization watching us. Kidnapping civilians does not bring legitimacy. Violence does not deliver political gains. Terror does not win. Israel now advances its second goal with the same determination and clarity. Hamas must be disarmed. The next steps are grounded in phase 2 of the peace plan, supported by Israel, key international players and partners, and this Security Council. Phase 2 is written. It is structured. It provides for the establishment of a responsible governing framework for Gaza. There are positive signs. However, one obstacle remains: Hamas disarmament. The choice now rests with Hamas. Acceptance of full disarmament enables progress. Refusal places full responsibility on Hamas for the consequences. Clarity is essential about what disarmament actually means.
The 10,098 meeting of the Security Council is called to an order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Algeria, Armenia, Australia, Austria, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Cuba, Egypt, Germany, Iceland, India, Indonesia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Iraq, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Lebanon, Malaysia, Maldives, Mexico, Morocco, Namibia, Norway, the Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, the Republic of Korea, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, South Africa, Spain, Switzerland, the Syrian Arab Republic, Thailand, Timor-Leste, Tunisia, Turkey, Uganda, United Arab Emirates, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and Vietnam to participate in this meeting. It's so decided. I propose that the Council invite the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in this meeting in accordance with the provisional rules of procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There be no objection. It's so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's provisional rules of procedure, I invite Mr. Ramirez Alakbarov, the Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process and United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, to participate in this meeting. It's so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite the following to participate in this meeting: His Excellency Mr. Jaime Hermida Castillo, Vice Chair of the Committee on the Exercise of Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People; His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lamberdinis, Head of the Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations; and His Excellency Mr. Majid Abdulaziz, Permanent Observer of the Permanent Observer Mission of the League of the Arab States to the United Nations. It's so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of the item 2 of the agenda. I'll now give the floor to Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, Excellencies, I brief you today at the moment of both profound opportunity and considerable risk. In front of us, we see a potential turning point for Gaza, a genuine chance for a better future. But many uncertainties remain. In parallel, we also see a continued unraveling in the occupied West Bank and a region mired in tension. The announced start of the second phase of the President Trump's 20-point plan, comprehensive plan, is a critical step in consolidating the ceasefire in Gaza, alongside the establishment of subsidiary bodies of the Board of Peace, including the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza and the Office of the High Representative for Gaza. I have just returned from Cairo, where I met with the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza to discuss how the United Nations can best support the committee's effort to provide critical public services, facilitate humanitarian aid, and lay the groundwork for reconstruction in Gaza, in line with the UN Security Council Resolution 2803. The task at hand is monumental. It requires full coordination among all stakeholders, taking into account the existing systems and capacities. The United Nations stands ready to support the committee and the Palestinians in Gaza as they start the arduous work of rebuilding. I welcome the recovery of the last hostage in Gaza, and I am relieved that they have been returned to Israel for burial. I extend my condolences to the family of Ran Gvili. With all hostages returned, I hope that the process of healing for the families of all of those affected may begin. Implementation of the next phase of the comprehensive plan must advance in good faith. I'm encouraged by Israel's announcement on 25th January that Rafah crossing will open to pedestrian movements in both directions. Demilitarization of the Gaza Strip is essential to enable conditions and security arrangements that are urgently required to facilitate the work of the National Committee across the entire Strip. Mr. President, my last visit to Gaza affirmed one truth. The people in Gaza are ready and eager to lead the way to a better, more stable future. Less than 2 weeks ago, amidst enormous misery and pain, I witnessed inspiring resilience and hope. Youths taking their exams and excelling in the most difficult of circumstances. Farmers who are unable to import seeds but still finding ways to plant greenhouses repaired with makeshift materials, and small business owners devising ingenious solutions when faced with scarce materials and a devastated market. Such efforts are being replicated across Gaza. They deserve our support. But nevertheless, nearly the entire population in Gaza remains in need of humanitarian assistance. Heavy rainfall and cold temperatures have exacerbated the suffering of more than 1.5 million displaced Palestinians in Gaza, who had little or no means to seek safe shelter. I heard firsthand how families sat vigil through the night just trying to hold down the four corners of their tents. I saw a little girl carrying heavy stones just to prevent her shelter from blowing away in the wind. I don't know her age, but she looked to me being just 4-year-old. The shelter response has suffered from restrictions for the entry of vital materials and technical expertise. As a result, shelter sites in Gaza do not meet the scale of the needs or international standards. Transitional shelter sites must provide access to much needed essential services. Above all, they must be voluntary and dignified and in line with humanitarian principles. The support of all stakeholders is needed. Mr. President, across all sectors, humanitarian actors are still unable to operate at scale in Gaza. Their work is being hindered by insecurity, custom clearance challenges, the limited number of partners authorized by Israeli authorities to bring cargo into Gaza, delays and denials of cargoes at crossing, and limited routes available for transporting supplies within Gaza. While the Jordan corridor remains a humanitarian lifeline, current volumes entering Gaza through back-to-back arrangements represent only a fraction of what was previously achieved when the direct route was operational. Since 10 October, only 9% of 2720 processed aid has entered Gaza via Jordan. Fully utilizing existing proven regional corridors remains essential to saving lives in Gaza. Entry of mobile homes, rescue equipment, fuel, and medical supplies continues to be severely restricted, endangering the lives of tens of thousands of IDPs and patients. To address this, materials must enter at scale. Access to public infrastructure and agricultural land remains restricted. Meanwhile, regular detonations of residential buildings are continued and repeated population displacements have occurred. On 30th December, Israel announced its plans to suspend the operations of some international NGOs. The government also notified 37 NGOs that their registration would expire at the end of 2025 due to what Israel says is the failure to comply with the new regulations, triggering a 60-day review period. Banning these NGOs will have a significant impact on the humanitarian response across the OPT. I urge Israel to immediately reverse this decision. Despite the ceasefire, the Israeli military continues to conduct military operations with airstrikes, shelling, and gunfire occurring across the street. Armed exchanges also persisted with Palestinian militants. Attacks in the vicinity or beyond of so-called yellow line are happening daily, and hundreds of Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire began, including many women and children. Civilians must be protected at all times. Amid the obstacles, we also have seen some welcome actions. The continued arrival of aid via Egypt, Jordan, Israel, occupied West Bank, and Cyprus has been critical. This has helped increase the volume of supplies brought into Gaza and led to improvements in nutrition status of the population. But more needs to be done. Mr. President, I would like to devote a reminder of my briefing to addressing the spiraling dynamics in the occupied West Bank. Every month, the United Nations and many others in this Council emphasize the gravity of the unfolding situation. But that has yet to translate into meaningful action on the ground. Negative trends are entrenched daily. The reporting period was marked by continued violence with extensive Israeli military operations, settlement expansion, settler violence, demolition, and large-scale detentions. In late December and early January, Israeli forces conducted intensified raids across Jenin, Nablus, Hebron, and Ramallah, frequently involving live fire and raising serious concerns about the use of lethal force. A 16-year-old boy was shot and killed during a raid in Qabatia on 20th December and after reportedly throwing a brick toward an IDF soldier. And multiple Palestinians were killed or fatally wounded during the operation south of Nablus. There have been large-scale arrest campaigns of Palestinians by Israeli security forces, including children, amidst reports of ill treatment and torture and continued deaths in custody. Palestinian attacks against Israelis have also persisted. On 26 December, a Palestinian man killed 2 Israelis, including a woman, in 2 ramming and stabbing attacks in northern Israel. At the same time, settler violence intensified. In December, repeated settler attacks led to the displacement of the entire community of Hirbet Yanun in Nablus Governorate, and in January we saw the forcible displacement of some 80 households from Ras Ain Auja in Jericho Governorate. Demolitions and large-scale land seizures continued across the northern West Bank. Evictions in East Jerusalem's Silvan neighborhood on 4th January and extensive demolitions in Tul Karam Nur Shams refugee camp at the end of December underscore how violence, displacement, and territorial fragmentation are converging on the ground. Meanwhile, settlement expansion has been rapid and relentless. The combination of settlement advancement, state land declarations, and persistent establishment of outposts is carving up and making vast swaths of land inaccessible for Palestinian use in the occupied West Bank. During the reporting period, approximately 1,860 housing units were advanced in the Area C. This includes 120 housing units at Sanur, a settlement that was evacuated in 2005. Additionally, 2,850 housing units were advanced in East Jerusalem. These include 2 large-scale plans, a plan for 1,500 housing units in residential towers in a government complex between Sheikh Jarrah and Mount Scopus, and a plan in East Talpiot for 950 housing units in several residential towers. The Israeli government has also published tenders for over 4,770 in Area C, including 3,401 housing units in E1, which, if built, would effectively sever the connection between the northern and southern West Bank. In recent weeks, the pressure campaign against UNRWA has also sharply escalated in an effort to end its operation in the occupied Palestinian territory. On 29 December, the Israeli Knesset passed legislation instructing Israeli authorities to seize UNRWA's compound in Sheikh Jarrah and Kafr Akab, and requiring utilities and financial service providers to deny service to UNRWA or any of its facilities. On 12 January, Israeli forces raided an UNRWA health center in occupied East Jerusalem and ordered it to close. A week later, Israeli forces forcibly entered the UNRWA headquarters in occupied East Jerusalem with bulldozers demolishing the buildings, and officials have made abhorrent calls for the annihilation of UNRWA staff. These acts are flagrant violation of international law and the privileges and immunities of the United Nations. I call on the Israeli government to abide by the October 2025 advisory opinion by International Court of Justice, which states that Israel is obliged under international law to facilitate UNRWA's operations, not hinder or prevent them. Despite significant increases in international support in 2025, the unilateral withholding by Israel of all Palestinian clearance revenues continues. The Palestinian Authority continues to face the growing fiscal crisis resulting in partial payment of civil servant salaries and a reduction in services. Nearly $2.5 billion of clearance revenues remains withheld by Israel. Mr. President, Israeli government policies have facilitated a number of destructive trends: rapid settlement expansion and its related infrastructure, the creation and legalization of outposts, widespread demolitions and displacements, state land declarations, deepening movement and access restrictions, and expansion of municipal boundaries. Persistent and extreme settlers' violence, frequently accompanied or supported by Israeli security forces, continues to inflame tensions, forcibly displace Palestinians, and exacerbate instability. The consequences have been severe, deepening the occupation fragmenting Palestinian space, and strengthen territorial contiguity for settlement. And ultimately, these steps are further undermining the prospects for peace and the establishment of a two-state solution. Unless urgently addressed, they may also jeopardize progress on implementing the second phase of the ceasefire agreement. Mr. President, the implementation of the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire plan is critical and will require our firm and collective commitment. There is a genuine opportunity to lay the foundations for a more stable and secure future for Palestinians and Israelis, and advance the goal of legitimate Palestinian government that reunifies Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and chart a course toward ending the occupation and advancing a political process that will ultimately end the conflict. The UN will continue to support Palestinians and Israelis to end the conflict and to realize a two-state solution in line with previous United Nations resolutions and international law. Mr. President, I thank you and this Council for your attention.
I thank Mr. Alakbarov for his briefings. I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, at the outset, allow me to thank you for presiding over this open debate at such a pivotal moment for peace, justice, and human dignity. Allow me also to welcome the ministers who are with us, to thank Mr. Ramiz Al-Akbarov for his briefing, and to welcome again our friends, the 5 elected new members of the Security Council, Bahrain, Colombia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Latvia, and Liberia. 80 years after the end of the Second World War, the core principles upon which the United Nations were founded remain as critical as ever. The right of peoples to self-determination, the prohibition on the acquisition of territory by threat or use of force, and the rule of international law as the guarantor of the rights of individuals, regardless of race, religion, or nationality, and of nations, large and small. Those principles are the expression of the wisdom finally acquired by humanity following a devastating war, where peoples around the globe endured and witnessed aggression, genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes on a scale that altered the course of history and led to the founding of these United Nations to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war and to ensure international peace and security. It is these very principles that are at stake and under threat in Palestine. Asserting them there is upholding them everywhere. Abandoning them there is jeopardizing them everywhere. Mr. President, we welcome the ceasefire agreement reached last year under President Trump's plan, and we commend the personal engagement of President Trump and the U.S. administration, as well as the tireless efforts of the mediators who have worked to implement it. We supported the ceasefire in good faith, even in the face of repeated breaches, with at least 500 Palestinians killed since the ceasefire came into effect, with many more wounded and ongoing destruction by the occupying power, and while life-saving assistance, including shelter, continues to be obstructed in the depths of this harsh winter. We support the plan because it offered an immediate path toward ending the killing and suffering, the famine, and unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe inflicted on the Palestinian people in Gaza. While we recognize that thousands of lives have been saved by the ceasefire, these goals are yet to be fully achieved. We welcome the completion of the release of all Israeli hostages and prisoners alive and deceased, including the recovery of the remains of the last Israeli body 2 days ago. We had repeatedly said that only a ceasefire could allow for this to happen. Yet, we must ask, what about the countless Palestinian families whose loved ones have been killed, with thousands of bodies still crushed and buried under rubble, yet to be found, yet to be identified, and to be given dignified burial? What of the families who waited for the return of thousands denied, tortured, humiliated, starved, raped or missing? What of the entire families obliterated from existence, or the survivors of genocide left with grave injuries and amputations, who will carry the devastation with them for all their lives? What of the trauma and loss of an entire people? The suffering of the Palestinian people, civilian men, women, and children, must be ended with equal urgency. Healing, recovery, and justice are indispensable and a right for all. Full implementation of Phase 1 obligations, including an immediate end to the killing and unrestricted humanitarian access across the Gaza Strip, is essential. These are not new demands. They are the repeated calls of this Council and constitute obligations under international law. Moreover, Israel must end its ongoing war against humanitarian actors, including UNRWA and vital NGOs, whose safety and ability to operate have been repeatedly undermined. The destruction of UNRWA facilities, including the seizure and destruction of its headquarters in occupied East Jerusalem, which was also set ablaze, and the targeting of humanitarian personnel, and now the attempt to ban and expel recognized and respected NGOs operating on Palestinian territory, demonstrate total contempt for the very mechanisms established to protect and assist civilians. It is an attack on the United Nations by one of its members in ways we had never witnessed before. The advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on Israel's humanitarian obligations must be fully respected. But instead of compliance, we have witnessed continued obstruction to aid delivery, continued violations of the Charter and Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations, and continued grave breaches of international humanitarian law by the occupying power. In this regard, we call the letters of the Secretary General to the Security Council, to you, and General Assembly, including that in light of the gravity of the Israeli government's actions, and I quote, "A situation may exist in which a difference has arisen between the United Nations and the State of Israel regarding, among other things, the interpretation or application of the General Convention," end of quotation of the letter of the SG. Furthermore, we are obliged to underscore yet again, Israel is not the sovereign in the Palestinian territory. This illegal occupation has no rights whatsoever in occupied Palestine, including in Jerusalem. Mr. President, the ceasefire's permanence and success requires that Israel cease trying to dictate the future of Gaza and to fully withdraw from the territory. Gaza is an integral part of the Palestinian territory. I repeat, Gaza is an integral part of the Palestinian territory. It belongs to the Palestinian people. Nobody else and any transitional arrangements must fully respect our people's rights and our sovereignty over the occupied Palestinian territory. The Gaza Strip must be reunited with the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, without delay. And our people's right to self-determination and independent statehood, enshrined in the principles and purposes of the UN Charter, which I began with, and in numerous resolutions of the Security Council, General Assembly, ICJ rulings, and in peremptory norms of international law, cannot be disposed of. Israel has to abandon its plans to forcibly displace and replace our people across occupied Palestine. In the West Bank, Israeli military attacks and settler terrorism continue unabated, systematically driving Palestinians from their homes. Settlements continue to be advanced, all tools of rampant annexation. In this regard, we warn of the dangerous Israeli escalation against Palestinian cities, villages, and refugee camps in the West Bank, including the implementation of the so-called E1 settlement project. This must be stopped. The last families in Ras Ain al-Auja have been forced from their land, leaving no Palestinian presence in what was once a thriving community. This was the largest shepherding community in the southern Jordan Valley and the last to survive Israelis' ethnic cleansing in the area. United Nations reporting has now documented a record level of West Bank displacement in the last 2 years. Around 40,000 Palestinians violently and forcefully transferred from their homes, the highest figure ever since 1967. Despite the long-standing demands by the international community, including the Security Council for decades, for a halt to such illegal colonial practices, Israel persists with its impunity, entrenching its illegal occupation of our land and people every single day. This must be stopped. Mr. President, these events are not isolated. They are part of a sustained pattern that threatens not only the Palestinian people, but the foundational principles of this organization. This cannot be ignored. Yet, we still see a chance for peace. I repeat, yet we still see a chance for peace. A real historical opportunity to end the occupation, to realize Palestinian rights, to achieve just and lasting peace in accordance with international law and UN resolutions. The Palestinian Authority is working in impossible circumstances to uphold its responsibilities. It is working to retrieve the bodies of Palestinians, to restore education, to revive the health sector, to provide shelter and assistance, to reopen the Rafah crossing in both directions, to prepare for recovery and reconstruction. It has persisted in its decision to embark on a peaceful path to freedom and has not deviated from it. It has conducted difficult reforms while being undermined politically and financially. It has adopted the principle of one state, one government, one law, and one weapon. Palestine is a reliable partner for peace, if peace is the objective. Palestine is a reliable partner for peace if peace is the objective. The whole world can testify to that. But the Israeli government's objective is not peace, it is domination. Netanyahu yet again bragged that he will never allow a Palestinian state to emerge. He went further, reaffirming Israel will retain control from the river to the sea, promising eternal occupation, a delusional idea that will continue depriving our region of the prospects and promise of peace. Mr. President, the Palestinian people have an inalienable right to self-determination, including the right to the independence of their state. Any implementation of peace plans must be uphold this right fully and unequivocally, and must preserve the unity and territorial integrity of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. There must be no administrative or legal, or I should rather say illegal, measures that entrench division and occupation instead of bringing an end to them. Mr. President, the best way to consolidate the ceasefire is to move towards a just peace. This requires the mobilization of the international community as a whole, in charting a clear path away from occupation and war towards shared peace, security and prosperity as foreseen by the New York Declaration and supported overwhelmingly by the member states of these United Nations. We must all work together to advance these noble objectives. We welcomed the launch of Phase 2 of the ceasefire agreement and the establishment of transitional bodies to help administer Gaza in the transitional period ahead of reunifying the West Bank and Gaza Strip under the Palestinian Authority as stated by this Council. Palestine must be central to and fully represented in any processes that determines its future. We reiterate our readiness to work with the United States and regional and international partners to ensure respect for the ceasefire agreement in line with international law. Our people are waiting for the recovery and rebuilding promised to them after so much pain and loss inflicted on them. We cannot let them down. Palestine needs a just peace more than any other country because it suffers most in its absence. It is seeking a peaceful path to freedom. We are seeking a peaceful path to freedom. It should be encouraged and supported, not undermined. We want our rights, the rights accorded to all nations, nothing more, but also nothing less and nothing else. I repeat, we want our rights, the rights accorded to all nations, nothing more, but also nothing less and nothing else. Free Palestine, peace in the Middle East, and I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. I'll now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to thank the briefer and welcome the ministers who joined us today and the new members of the Security Council. Mr. President, from the first day of the war in Gaza, Israel has been clear before this Council about its goals. We had two goals: every hostage home, Hamas disarmed. With the return of Ran Gvili, I can finally say that the first goal has been achieved. Every hostage been brought home. What many believed was impossible is now a fact. We said we would bring them home, all of them, no matter how long it took. Now, for the first time since 2014, there is not a single Israeli hostage held in Gaza. This achievement was secured by the brave soldiers of the Israeli Defense Forces, young men and women who stepped forward with incredible determination, resolve, and courage. They defended our people. They brought our hostages home. They did so under fire, under pressure, and under relentless scrutiny, including from within this very chamber. Israel owes them a profound debt. The world owes them one as well. This effort was also driven and sustained by the leadership of the United States. The peace framework advanced by President Donald Trump and his administration created a path forward. Today, for the first time in 843 days, I sit in this chamber without the yellow hostage pin on my lapel. Everyone in Israel wore it, until yesterday. This is a moment of deep national significance for Israel. This moment also carries a message far beyond Israel. Western liberal democracies do not cave to terrorists. They do not reward mass murder. They do not trade their values for silence. The message is clear for every terrorist organization watching us. Kidnapping civilians does not bring legitimacy. Violence does not deliver political gains. Terror does not win. Israel now advances its second goal with the same determination and clarity. Hamas must be disarmed. The next steps are grounded in phase 2 of the peace plan, supported by Israel, key international players and partners, and this Security Council. Phase 2 is written. It is structured. It provides for the establishment of a responsible governing framework for Gaza. There are positive signs. However, one obstacle remains: Hamas disarmament. The choice now rests with Hamas. Acceptance of full disarmament enables progress. Refusal places full responsibility on Hamas for the consequences. Clarity is essential about what disarmament actually means. Disarmament does not mean staged handovers for cameras. It does not mean weapons hidden underground while promises are made above ground. There is no real disarmament until Hamas's military infrastructure is dismantled. That includes weapons, command centers, and terror tunnels. No economic rebuilding can take place while Hamas remains armed. No civilian future can exist while a terrorist army controls Gaza. A genocidal terrorist organization should not have any weapons. Hamas understands this reality. That is why it delays, that is why it deceives. But don't just take Israel's word for it. Hamas put this in writing. In the final days of last year, Hamas released this manifesto. Very impressive one. This document, a copy of which was sent to all of your missions this morning, removes all doubt about Hamas's real intentions. They wrote it. It wasn't us. In this document, it says very clearly, it rejects disarmament, it rejects giving up political power, it denies the atrocities of October 7th, it justifies and glorifies its mass murder. Hamas even boasts about its strategy and diplomacy. In its own words, it calls one of the achievements of October 7th the collapse, and I quote, of Israel's image as a Western democracy. That tells you everything. This is not the language of peace, even when dressed up as diplomacy. It is a roadmap for future violence. Do not fall into Hamas's playbook. Do not let its propaganda write your talking points. Hamas still remains heavily armed. Let me show you the numbers. It still holds thousands of rockets, anti-tank missiles, and tens of thousands of Kalashnikov rifles. In total, Hamas still holds roughly 60,000 assault rifles. These weapons are used not only against us, against Israel, but against Gazans who oppose Hamas rule. This is not a movement preparing for peace. This is a terrorist army preparing for its next war. Israel has fully implemented phase 1 of the agreement. Since the beginning of the October ceasefire, the volume of aid has increased sharply. Let's take a look at the numbers. More than 33,000 trucks have entered Gaza since October 10, 2025. They delivered over 850,000 tons of food, 8,300 tons of medical supplies, more than 420,000 tents. Every week, more than 4,200 trucks enter Gaza. 12 field hospitals are operating today. Israel does not limit UN assistance and has invited agencies to increase daily deliveries. Israel has opened all major crossings into Gaza and earlier this week announced the reopening of the Rafah crossing. Aid is flowing, coordination continues. Mr. President, while attention remains fixed on Gaza, another crisis demands urgency. Iran. The Ayatollah regime is brutally repressing and murdering its own people. Behind 20 days of internet and telephone shutdowns and blackouts, civilians demanding freedom are executed, arrested, and silenced. Reports now indicate fatalities exceeding 30,000. That number should shock this council. Imagine for 1 minute a Middle East without this regime. Think about it for 1 minute. Billions of dollars would no longer be spent funding terror. Lebanon can regain its sovereignty finally from the claws of Iranian-backed Hezbollah. Syria could stop serving as an Iranian weapons corridor and move towards stability finally. Palestinians in Gaza and Judea and Samaria could focus on improving their lives instead of being trapped by armed radicals. The problem is not the people of the region. The problem is the regimes and militias that profit from chaos. Look at Yemen. Yemen offers another clear example of how the Iranian regime exports hate. The Houthis are not fighting over borders. They have no border with us. They have no border with the US. They have no border with most countries here. They are not fighting over land. The flag tells the entire story. Look at the flag of the Houthis. That's what it says in Arabic. Allah Akbar, Al-Maut li-America, Al-Maut li-Israel, Alana al-Yahud, An-Nasr lil-Islam. In English, God is great, death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews, victory to Islam. That is the official flag of the Houthis. This is radicalism. It is insanity. That hatred did not originate in Yemen. It was cultivated, funded, and armed by Tehran. The Iranian regime diverted its own people's money to fund terror instead of providing basic needs. This is how the Iranian regime operates. It builds networks of violence and exports them across the Middle East and beyond. A regime that massacres its own people cannot be trusted to respect others. The world's most extreme regime must never obtain the world's most dangerous weapon. Israel has no hostility toward the people of Iran. Their courage is undeniable. Their struggle for freedom deserves support. Their future must be free of tyranny. Hope, however, is not a strategy. As Hamas is dismantled, the Iranian regime must be confronted with the same seriousness. The same clarity must apply. The same standards must hold. Israel's position is unmistakable. Every hostage was brought home. Hamas must now be dismantled completely. Gaza must be demilitarized and de-radicalized. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for the statement. I now give the floor to the members of the Council. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Sarah Beslow Nyanti, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Liberia.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank the Somali presidency for convening this high-level debate and the briefers for their insightful interventions. Mr. President, Excellencies, the Middle East is not a distant theater of conflict. It is a central test of whether this Council can still shape outcomes rather than merely cataloging suffering. In the Middle East, we do not confront one crisis. We face a chain reaction of wars, reprisals, and unresolved grievances, each feeding the next. Liberia's own experience reminds us that silencing guns matters, but peace does not come from silence of the guns alone. It comes from choices made early, deliberately, and sustained over time. Mr. President, for millions in the Middle East, war is not an interruption of life. It is life itself. There are people who are born under bombardment, who learn adulthood under occupation or siege, and who will grow old without ever knowing what it means to live without fear. Entire lives, full lives, have been lived inside conflict from the first breath to the last. And nowhere is this tragedy more unforgivable than in the lives of children. Some babies die while trying to nurse from mothers whose bodies have nothing left to give. They die not from rare diseases or unavoidable fate, but from hunger, blockade, displacement, and decisions made far from their cries. This is not abstract. This is happening in real time. Children are growing up inside the wreckage of our choices. They inherit wars they did not declare, hatreds they did not choose, and borders drawn more fiercely than compassion. They carry the cost of adult power struggles because the international community has too often accepted delay, denial, and turning a blind eye as its policy. While children elsewhere worry about exams, football matches, music, friendships, and what they might become in the future, children in the Middle East learn how to stay safe during explosions and the best route to take to find food. They live in fear, not knowing what it means to be free. This is not only a moral failure, it is a strategic catastrophe that recycles violence, enmity, and hate. Mr. President, Excellencies, the reality of the Middle East is unfortunately grim, but the horizon beckons hope. Liberia notes recent diplomatic efforts aimed at reducing violence and reopening political space in Gaza and across the region. We applaud initiatives led by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States, other regional leaders, and other stakeholders, which have helped to create momentum toward de-escalation, improved humanitarian access, and dialogue. Progress, however, is fragile, but progress matters. Let's be clear, this momentum must be sustained. Therefore, Liberia encourages continued engagement with this Council and with all stakeholders to deepen the progress, seize every opportunity, and consolidate the gains already made. History shows that diplomatic openings will close inevitably, not because they are imperfect, but because they are abandoned. Mr. President, no conflict has more broadly defined the region than the one between Israel and Palestine. Liberia is concerned by this protracted conflict. We reiterate the urgent need for immediate and sustained de-escalation and for expanding humanitarian access that is predictable and safe. Liberia continues to support a negotiated two-state solution consistent with relevant Security Council resolutions. Security that lacks political legitimacy cannot endure. Crisis management, however necessary, cannot substitute for a genuine peace process. Mr. President, Excellencies, force can dominate a moment, but only justice can shape a future. If force worked, we would not be here having this debate. What is not resolved through dialogue will resurface louder, angrier, and more dangerous. Hence, any solution must be shaped with the involvement of all concerned stakeholders. Mr. President and Excellencies, beyond Gaza, we are aligned by rising tensions along the blue line between Israel and Lebanon. We recall Security Council Resolution 1701 and support UNIFIL's stabilizing role. In Syria, humanitarian suffering continues amid political paralysis. Resolution 2254 remains the agreed framework for sustainable peace. Regional engagement must translate into a political movement that is inclusive, but not an acceptance of permanent stagnation. In Yemen, fragile steps toward de-escalation offer a chance that must not be squandered. Dialogue remains the only path that does not end in more deaths and destruction. Peace in the Middle East cannot be defined simply by what ends. It must be defined by what begins. Dignity, justice, and the freedom for people to build ordinary lives. It must offer a future where Jews and Palestinians, Christians and Muslims, Arabs and non-Arabs can live not only side by side, but together working in the same hospitals, trading in the same markets, studying in the same universities, protecting shared water sources, building businesses, and competing in ideas rather than arms. Finally, Mr. President, Liberia will close with the following. We call for expanded regular humanitarian corridors into Gaza and all conflict zones in the region. We urge support for confidence-building measures facilitated by UN peace-building measures, peacekeeping, regional partners support. We encourage regional actors and international partners to sustain diplomatic momentum and avoid the collapse of current openings. We call on all stakeholders to support efforts that restore political legitimacy, governance capacity, and economic stability for both Israelis and Palestinians. And we stress the need to promote regional commitments to stop the use of children in conflicts and to shield schools and hospitals from attacks or misuse. Liberia stands ready to work with all Council members for sustainable peace in the Middle East. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Nyanti for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Georgios Gerapetraitis, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the Deputy Special Coordinator for his briefing and welcome the new elected members of the Council. We're looking forward to working with all of you. Distinguished colleagues, as Greece continues its tenure on this Council, we do so with clarity of purpose and a strong sense of responsibility. At a time when the international system is facing profound challenges, the United Nations and the Security Council in particular continues to provide the central and indispensable framework for dialogue, cooperation and collective action in support of international peace and security. Greece's foreign policy is firmly grounded in respect for the Charter of the United Nations and the principles enshrined therein: respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, the inviolability of borders, and the prohibition of the threat of use of force. These principles are not abstract ideals. They constitute the foundation of a stable international order and guide our collective work within this Council. Peace in the Middle East is an urgent moral, political, and humanitarian imperative. Greece consistently supports all initiatives that can have a tangible, positive impact on the ground and bring the region closer to a lasting peace and stability. In this spirit, we have strongly supported the comprehensive plans for Gaza and voted in favor of Security Council Resolution 2803. We acknowledge the progress achieved towards sustained ceasefire and the implementation of the 20-point Gaza peace plan endorsed by this Council. We have been very relieved that the body of the last hostage has been returned to his family. This development concludes a deeply painful chapter for the families. It also opens the path for the full implementation of Phase 2, which is a truly decisive moment. This next step must include full disarmament of Hamas and other armed groups. Addressing Israel's legitimate long-term security concerns is a key precondition for sustainable peace. The nomination of a Palestinian National Committee for the administration of Gaza, with the support of the Presidency of the Palestinian Authority, is a welcome development. It represents an important step towards legitimate and accountable governance, which is indispensable for stability, reconstruction, and long-term peace. The future reconstruction of Gaza must be credible, coordinated and firmly anchored in legitimate governance structures and embedded in a broader political and credible political horizon. Gaza and the West Bank is a single, indivisible territorial unit for a future Palestinian state. The path forward is clear, a credible political process leading to a two-state solution, allowing Palestinians and Israelis to live side by side in peace and security. Greece stands ready to contribute actively and responsibly to the peace process, including through the scaling up of humanitarian assistance and the development aid in the West Bank. It continues to provide treatment to children from Gaza in Greek hospitals. We are also actively contributing to efforts aimed at stabilizing security conditions in Gaza, including through our participation in the Civil-Military Coordination Center. Overall, our objective is clear: to help prepare the ground for the day after in Gaza, in close cooperation with the Palestinian National Committee and the Palestinian Authority, as well as with key regional partners such as Egypt. Peace requires the protection of civilians. Today, despite significant progress on the delivery of food and other goods, the humanitarian situation in Gaza remains difficult. Harsh weather conditions, devastated infrastructure, and shortages of food, water, and medical supplies continue to exacerbate suffering. Humanitarian access, including via Cyprus Maritime Corridor, must therefore be unimpeded. We're also concerned with recent developments affecting UNRWA, notably the demolition of its facilities in East Jerusalem. Beyond Gaza, the situation in the West Bank is steadily deteriorating. Rising settler violence, including against Christian communities, erodes trust and fuels instability on the ground. We also call for a halt to settlement activities, including in the E1 area. As the Greek Prime Minister stated during his recent visit to Ramallah and Jerusalem, Greece's support for the Palestinian Authority is unwavering. It remains the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, and as such must be empowered politically and financially. The Palestinian Authority has been very serious in promoting reforms. Withheld tax revenues must be released immediately. Equally, the preservation of the status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem is of paramount importance. Jerusalem is not only a city of profound religious significance, but a litmus test for coexistence and mutual respect. Mr. President, turning to Lebanon, this Council's visit to Beirut last December was more than symbolic. It sent a clear message: Lebanon is not alone. We welcome the progress achieved in Phase 1 of the National Disarmament Plan, which brings Lebanon closer to restoring full control over its territory in line with relevant Security Council resolutions. Nevertheless, disarmament must be coupled with sustained capacity building as well as clear plan for reconstruction. Greece considers Lebanon as a key partner for peace. It will support Lebanon in its efforts for security and prosperity. It recently delivered military equipment to the Lebanese armed forces and stands ready to do more. In the same vein, we welcome the organization of an international conference in Paris on March 5, aiming at garnering international support toward the LAF, and we're looking forward to our participation. For Syria, Mr. President, 2025 has been a landmark year. The fall of the Assad regime gives a historic opportunity to a country of great importance for the Arab world and the Eastern Mediterranean. Greece stands by Syria and is offering support bilaterally and in its capacity as EU and Security Council member. We must acknowledge the progress achieved so far, but we should also not disregard the persisting challenges. We welcome the assurances by the Syrian government regarding adherence to international law and good neighborly relations. We expect them to be honored, especially in terms of maritime delimitations with neighboring states. Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity must be fully respected. We also support the country's engagement with the United Nations and warmly encourage its further enhancement, looking forward to the prompt establishment of the Office of the Special Envoy in Damascus. At the same time, we should not forget that 2025 was marked by violence against Alawites, Druze, Christians, and lately the Kurds. We need more information, clarity, and indeed accountability. We reiterate the need for an inclusive transition and protection of all Syrians, including women, without any discrimination whatsoever due to religious or ethnic background, as a prerequisite for stability and recovery. Syria's wealth lies in its diverse and pluralistic society. Civilians must be protected under all circumstances. The latest developments in the northeast prove how fragile the transition remains and causes concern. The ceasefire agreement reached between the Syrian government and the SDF should be fully implemented by all sides. We call on all actors, including external actors, to act with restraint and avoid escalation that could destabilize the country and exacerbate ethnic tensions. The protection of Kurds must be fully ensured and their political and cultural rights safeguarded in a united Syria. We would also like to underline the need to tackle terrorism and extremism and address the military and security sector reform. In particular, the fight against Daesh, ISIS should continue, and detainees camps must be fully safeguarded. Finally, on Yemen, we reaffirm our full respect for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, and we call upon all parties to engage constructively and in good faith in an inclusive, Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political process under the auspices of the United Nations. Despite the escalation in the south, we remain vigilant. While the situation in the Red Sea is becoming more complicated, we reiterate the importance of maritime security and freedom of navigation. The Red Sea constitutes a vital waterway for the region and the world, and the Houthis continue to pose a serious threat in this regard. Greece, honoring its long maritime tradition, will continue to support regional and international activities and provide her leadership to EU naval operation Aspides in line with Council resolutions and in full respect of international law. In conclusion, Mr. President, Greece remains fully committed to working with all members of this Council, with the United Nations and with regional partners to turn commitments into action so that hope prevails over suffering, dignity over despair, and peace becomes a reality delivered. As a country of the Eastern Mediterranean, Greece is deeply conscious of the direct impact that instability in the region has on international peace and security. This awareness, together with our long-standing commitment to multilateralism and international law, underpins our readiness to act as a constructive and reliable partner in efforts to promote dialogue, de-escalation, and lasting peace. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Jared Petraeus for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Deputy Special Coordinator Al-Akbarov, for your briefing. It was good to spend time with you late last year. Welcome to our colleagues, Your Excellencies of Foreign Ministers from Greece and Liberia. I think first and foremost, we should truly take heart that Ron Gavili's remains have finally returned to his family, who have suffered through unthinkable hardship for far too long. His funeral was today, and we hope his return brings a measure of solace and closure for the family that I also had the honor to spend some time with. And I think we all hope the remains of all the deceased are returned to their loved ones, those that were killed in this horrible war started by Hamas, so that these families can have some type of closure and peace. Colleagues, for the first time since 2014, in over a decade, Hamas and its terrorist affiliates no longer hold any hostages in Gaza. That's extraordinary, and we should take note of it. And I hope all those who claimed Hamas didn't know the locations of every hostage understand, frankly, their error. It is only due to the relentless efforts of the Israeli people and government, the tireless work of President Trump, his special envoys, Witkoff and Kushner, and the strong pressure put on Hamas, brought to bear by not only the United States, but our partners in the region, that all the hostages have at last returned home, and we could take those yellow ribbons off our lapels. Colleagues, on January 16th, President Trump celebrated the formation of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. For the first time since 2007, the people of Gaza who desperately want peace, and they want peace and not Hamas, its supporters or its enablers, they have an opportunity to chart a peaceful future for the Gaza Strip. We are grateful, deeply grateful, for Dr. Ali Sheikh's leadership of the National Committee and for our partnership with those serving alongside him to restore public services, to rebuild civil institutions, and to stabilize daily life in Gaza. Last week in Davos, President Trump announced the Board of Peace, and with it, the transition to phase 2 of the 20-point plan, both of which were established and endorsed by this committee in Resolution 2803. The results of phase 1 speak for themselves. A ceasefire that the entire world were begging for and demanding. Humanitarian aid that was so desperately needed. And the release and return of all hostages to their families. Phase 2 will advance the full demilitarization and reconstruction of Gaza in line with the President's plan and with Security Council Resolution 2803. On behalf of the United States, I would like to thank all those that have committed to joining the Board of Peace, especially fellow council members Bahrain and Pakistan. Under President Trump's chairmanship, the Board of Peace is acting and not just talking. With the President's vision and tenacity, the board will help realize a new Gaza and a break from this decades-old cycle of violence. We realize it's unconventional. Change makes some uncomfortable. But with this innovative approach, we are leaving behind decades of wasted time, wasted money, and wasted chances for peace. And we are already seeing results. With the cooperation and assistance of Israel and our Board of Peace partners, over 55,000 trucks have entered Gaza, bringing food, shelter, and medicine since the ceasefire began. Over 1.3 million people have received food assistance in December. We welcomed the reopening of Allenby Gate and King Hussein Bridge, the crossing between Israel and Jordan, and we welcome the full reopening of the Rafah border crossing, which will expedite the flow of medical evacuations. But we must take care. Assistance cannot devolve into dependence, and with support from the High Representative for Gaza, Nikolai Mladinov, the National Committee will restore essential services throughout Gaza and foster an economy where opportunity replaces unemployment and dependence. But before we can reach this goal, Hamas and other militant groups must lay down their arms. Point 1 of the President's 20-point plan is that Gaza will be a de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. They must live up to their end of the bargain. Point 2 is that Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza who have suffered for far too long and for more than enough. Only de-radicalization, only disarmament, Only demilitarization will bring Gaza prosperity and stability, and we, along with our partners on the Board of Peace and in consultation with the National Committee, will apply pressure to Hamas to honor its commitment and to disarm. Hamas must not have any role in the governance of Gaza, directly or indirectly, in any form, period. All military, terror, and offensive infrastructure, including tunnels and weapon production facilities, will be destroyed and not rebuilt. International, independent monitors will supervise a process of demilitarization of Gaza to include placing weapons permanently beyond use through an agreed process of decommissioning and supported by an internationally funded buyback and reintegration program. New Gaza will be fully committed to building a prosperous economy and a peaceful coexistence with its neighbors. We salute and thank our friends who have agreed to contribute to the International Stabilization Force. Under the leadership of Major General Jasper Jeffers of the United States Army, the ISF will begin to establish control and stability so that the Israeli Defense Forces can withdraw from Gaza based on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization. These will be agreed upon between the IDF, the ISF, the guarantors, and the United States with an objective of a secure Gaza that no longer poses a threat to its neighbors or its citizens. Colleagues, the United States remains fully committed to working in close partnership with Israel, with key Arab and Muslim majority nations, and with the international community to bring the peace, the prosperity, and the security and dignity to the region that its people deserve. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alakbarov for his briefing, and I also join others in welcoming the foreign ministers of Liberia and Greece to the Council today. This week brought the long-awaited return of the final remaining hostage in Gaza, Ran Gavili, killed while defending families at Kibbutz Alumim during the brutal Hamas attack on October the 7th. As my Foreign Secretary said, our thoughts are with Ran's family as they now finally lay him to rest. The suffering of October the 7th and the devastating conflict that followed serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of our collective efforts to secure lasting peace in the Middle East. I will make 3 points. First, we welcome the announcement of the Palestinian National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, an important step in implementing the peace plan and putting Palestinians at the heart of efforts to recover and rebuild. We call for the swift implementation of Phase 2 of the peace plan as set out in Security Council Resolution 2803, including the withdrawal of Israeli forces, the decommissioning of Hamas's weapons, the deployment of the ISF, and a clear timeline for transition of governance from the Board of Peace to a reformed Palestinian Authority. Hamas can have no role in the future governance of Gaza. Second, for the peace plan to succeed, we must also see urgent action to address the still catastrophic humanitarian situation. The UN reports that at least 9 infants have died of hypothermia this winter, including a 3-month-old baby last week. This is completely unconscionable, especially when life-saving shelter and medical supplies remain at the border, blocked by Israeli authorities. We welcome Israel's commitment to partially open the Rafah crossing. But this is not enough. Rafah and all crossings must be fully opened to allow life-saving humanitarian supplies to enter at scale. The UK condemns Israel's egregious attacks against UNRWA's compound in East Jerusalem and its restrictions on the work of international NGOs. These are the backbone of the humanitarian response, providing $1 billion of funding annually. And without them, Palestinians will face yet more suffering. We call on Israel to fulfill its humanitarian commitments under President Trump's 20-point plan and its obligations under international law. Finally, we cannot allow the deeply concerning trajectory of Israeli actions in the West Bank to undermine our efforts to secure peace. We condemn ongoing settler violence and outpost construction in Area B. And we call upon the Israeli government to tackle this with effective law enforcement and accountability measures as needed. Israeli movement restrictions and incursions into Area A must cease. We oppose ongoing illegal settlement expansion, including recent developments around E1. President, we cannot afford to lose momentum towards peace. The UK remains committed to supporting swift implementation of Resolution 2803 and to forging a new future built upon a two-state solution with Israelis and Palestinians living in peace, security, and dignity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alak Barov for the briefing. The Middle East, the cradle of human civilization, has long suffered the scourge of war and displacement, making it the region that has the most hotspot issues in the world. Today, the Middle East once again stands at a historic crossroads with sensitive and fragile security situations and overlapping conflicts. The question of Palestine remains at the heart of the issue of the Middle East. The international community should further build consensus to promote a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the Palestinian question at an early date. First, priority should be given to the maintenance of peace and stability and the immediate cessation of all violent conflicts. We welcome the return of all hostages or their remains to Israel. Over 3 months have passed since the first phase ceasefire agreement in Gaza was reached. However, military strikes are still ongoing and civilian casualties continue to rise. The situation in the West Bank remains tense, where the occupying power continues to expand settlements and condone settler violence. China calls on all parties, in particular Israel, to fully comply with the ceasefire agreement and work towards a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire in Gaza. Israel should immediately halt settlement activities and curb settler violence. Second, it is crucial to alleviate civilian suffering and ensure unhindered humanitarian access to occupied territory. The humanitarian situation in Gaza remains dire, with restricted access for humanitarian assistance. We urge Israel to fulfill its obligations under international humanitarian law, open all border crossings, lift restrictions on humanitarian access, and cease its suppression of humanitarian agencies. Recently, UNRWA premises in East Jerusalem were forcibly demolished and set on fire. China expresses grave concern over this development. Israel has an obligation to ensure the privileges and immunities of UNRWA and its normal operations. Third, in line with the two-state solution, post-conflict arrangements in Gaza should be advanced in a prudent and orderly manner. Gaza is the homeland of the Palestinian people, and its post-conflict arrangements are crucial to the political settlement of the Palestinian question. Any arrangements concerning Gaza's future should adhere to the principle of Palestinians governing Palestine, respect the will of the Palestinian people, accommodate the legitimate concerns of Middle Eastern countries, and be aligned with the two-state solution. China will continue to support Palestine's leading role in post-conflict governance in Gaza. The Security Council bears primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. As such, it should continue to closely follow the situation in Gaza and its post-conflict arrangements and play its due role in this regard. President, the current situation in Iran has drawn widespread attention. As the shadow of war looms large, tensions are rising in the Middle East. Iran is an independent sovereign state, and its own affairs should be decided independently by the Iranian people themselves. China hopes to see and supports stability in Iran and supports upholding its sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. The use of force cannot solve problems. Any military adventurism will only push the region into an abyss of unpredictability. We call on all parties to abide by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, oppose interference in other countries' internal affairs, and reject the threat or use of force in international relations. China hopes that the United States and other relevant parties will heed the call of the international community and regional countries, do more things that are conducive to peace and stability in the Middle East, and avoid exacerbating tensions and adding fuel to the fire. President, the Middle East belongs to the people in the region. It is not a wrestling ground for major power rivalry, nor should it become a victim of a geopolitical contest of countries outside the region. China stands ready to work with the international community to respect the choice independently made by the people in the region, take seriously the legitimate concerns of regional countries, and jointly play a constructive role in promoting peace and stability in the Middle East. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by thanking the Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Mr. Ramez Al-Akbarov, for his briefing. I would also like to welcome Their Excellencies, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Liberia and the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Greece. And I welcome the presence of our colleagues, permanent representatives of Palestine and Israel, as well as the participation of other countries in this open debate. Mr. President, 100 days after the attainment of a ceasefire in Gaza, thanks to the efforts of the United States, Egypt, Turkey and Qatar, that we welcome, the humanitarian emergency persists. The response to the immense needs of the population remains largely insufficient. It is urgent that Israel remove all obstacles to humanitarian access. The United Nations and NGOs must be able to operate independently and impartially throughout Gaza in accordance with international humanitarian law. We ask for an end to the deregistration of dozens of international NGOs, including many French ones. Secondly, the increasing pressure on UNRWA, which has resulted notably in the demolition of its headquarters in Jerusalem in violation of the privileges and immunities of the United Nations. Thirdly, excessive restrictions on goods, including so-called dual-use items. And finally, fourthly, the persistent closure of certain crossing points. In this regard, the Rafah crossing point must be fully opened in both directions in accordance with the peace plan. Mr. President, France pays tribute to Ran Gvili, the last Israeli hostage held by Hamas, whose remains were able to be repatriated to Israel, and extends its condolences to his family and his loved ones. This repatriation paves the way to the end of the Hamas attack on the 7th of October and the inhuman capture of 250 people that were submitted to endless nightmares. This leads to the opening of the second phase of the peace plan for Gaza, which must make it possible to achieve lasting peace. France welcomes the mediation efforts of the United States, and we call upon all parties to honor their commitments. The establishment of a national committee for the administration of Gaza which is an integral part of Palestine, is an essential element of Palestinian ownership of this new phase. This national committee must be deployed on the ground and respond to the population's urgent needs with the support of the Palestinian Authority and the support of the international community. France intends to contribute fully to this effort. This step must pave the way to the disarmament of Hamas that should no longer have any role to play in the governance of Gaza, and there should be a return of the reformed Palestinian Authority to Gaza in order to restore a credible political horizon for the two-state solution in accordance with the New York Declaration. With regard to the establishment of the Board of Peace, its founding text raises major political and legal questions, particularly concerning its scope of application and its governance. France recalls that its action was authorized by the UN Charter and Resolution 2803. It's important, therefore, that the Security Council be regularly informed of the progress made in the implementation of Resolution 2803. Mr. President, the situation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem continues to deteriorate. Settler violence, the acceleration of settlement activity, including the advancement of the E1 project, the intensification of military operations and violations of the status quo at the holy sites undermines prospects for peace, including the implementation of the peace plan. France condemns all violence. We condemn the attack of the Palestinian in the north of Israel, leading to deaths. We condemn the settler attack of the 17th of January east of Ramallah, during which local residents and foreign nationals, including a French citizen, were assaulted. We call on the Israeli authorities to shed full light on this attack and to initiate proceedings against those responsible. Over and above this, we would recall that peace and security for Israelis as well as for Palestinians, and this has been pointed out clearly by the General Assembly last September, involves the establishment of a two-state solution in all its aspects. France would also, Mr. President, like to take this opportunity to address two messages to the Council and to the region. First of all, the importance of respecting the ceasefire in Syria and of integrating the Syrian democratic forces into the Syrian army and state institutions. Secondly, the need to support the progress made by the Lebanese authorities in favor of the state's monopoly on weapons. To this end, France will organize with the United States and Saudi Arabia an international support conference on the 5th of March in Paris. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alok Barra for his informative briefing. Mr. President, we are relieved that the earthly remains of the last hostage held in Gaza since the terror attack on October 7 has finally been returned, and we hope that this can contribute to healing for the families affected. Denmark welcomes the announcement of Phase 2 of President Trump's peace plan. This moment carries a fragile but powerful promise, a hope that suffering may give way to stability. But hope on its own cannot rebuild lives. It needs to be supported by concrete actions. The Security Council has a key role in overseeing the implementation of Resolution 2803, including the work of the Board of Peace. While some elements of the Charter of the Board of Peace raise concerns, we wish the Board of Peace will be successful in implementing the peace plan for Gaza and effective as a transitional administration in Gaza in line with Resolution 2803 and the UN Charter. With the formation of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, we count on Palestinians to be involved in matters related to Palestinian territory. As we are entering Phase 2, we call on Hamas and other armed groups to decommission their weapons, because Hamas and other terrorist organizations must be disarmed and no longer play a role in Gaza. Furthermore, we call on Israel to facilitate a full reopening of the Rafah border crossing in both directions. These are central elements of the peace plan. Mr. President, despite some improvements, the humanitarian needs in Gaza remain vast and urgent. Families continue to struggle for shelter, protection, and medical care. The deregistration of at least 37 international non-governmental organizations operating in Gaza and the West Bank risks undermining the progress that has been made. International NGOs are responsible for nearly 3/4 of all shelter-related activities and deliver more than 80% of basic necessities. Their presence and unimpeded access are crucial to meeting urgent needs at the scale required. We call on Israel to reverse this decision. We also urge Israel to urgently allow for unrestricted access of aid, including dual-use items. As specified in Resolution 2803, this Council has underscored the importance of full resumption of humanitarian aid in a manner consistent with the humanitarian principles. Humanitarian assistance must never be obstructed. It is not a bargaining chip. It is a lifeline for the civilian population. The health system must also be restored, and patients in need of specialized care must be able to be transferred for treatment, especially to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, through the medical corridor in place before October 7, 2023. The UN-led humanitarian system remains best placed to undertake the monumental task of getting aid into those in need. United Nations agencies, working hand in hand with international NGOs, form the backbone of life-saving assistance and recovery in Gaza. In this regard, we echo the Secretary General's deep concern over Israel's adoption of legislation in December 2025 to cease UNRWA operations. These laws must be repealed without delay. Israel's demolition of an UNRWA compound in East Jerusalem last week is unacceptable and a violation of the UN's privileges and immunities under the UN Charter and international law. The inviolability of UN premises must be upheld, the privileges and immunities of UNRWA personnel respected, and all seized assets returned. As we look to the next stage of the peace plan for Gaza, we must not forget the West Bank, where unprecedented devastating developments are currently unfolding. As we heard from the Deputy Special Coordinator, this includes record numbers of expansions of illegal Israeli settlements, settler violence, intimidation, the seizure of farmland, and destruction of crops with widespread impunity. Families are forced to flee their homes. A recent example was the displacement this week of all 120 families in Ras Ain al-Auja, Bedouin community in the Jordan Valley, due to the escalating violence by the Israeli settlers. We urge Israel to immediately halt these measures. Mr. President, peace demands a clear path forward. A two-state solution remains the only viable option for long-term sustainable peace, one in which Gaza and the West Bank are reunited and where Palestinians and Israelis alike can live in security, freedom, and dignity. We hope that the implementation of the second phase of the peace plan will help turn the page and open a new chapter for Gaza. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement and now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Dr. Ramiz Alakbarov, Deputy Special Coordinator and Resident Coordinator of the United Nations Office for the Middle East Peace Process, for the briefing that he gave us. And we'd also extend a warm welcome to the foreign affairs ministers of Liberia and Greece, and also the representatives of all the other delegations honoring us today with their participation in the meeting. Recent events in the Middle East confirm the dynamic and complex nature of the region. marked by multi-dimensional challenges that require sustained and coordinated attention from the international community. Despite the ceasefire in effect since the 10th of October, the situation on the ground in Gaza continues to remain extremely fragile. While the cessation of hostilities has reduced the intensity of the conflict, it remains insufficient to guarantee effective and sustained protection for the civilian population. In this context, Panama acknowledges the mediation efforts undertaken by the United States, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey as a decisive contribution towards achieving a lasting and sustained ceasefire. Likewise, we recognize the efforts of the United Nations system and its humanitarian partners, which have enabled concrete progress to be made at an extremely adverse time. Nevertheless, this progress continues to be fragile and depends on full, safe, and sustained humanitarian access without administrative and bureaucratic obstacles preventing operations. A few days ago, the discovery of the mortal remains of Ran Gvili was confirmed, the last of the 251 hostages captured during the atrocious terrorist attack by Hamas of October 7th, 2023. We reiterate our condolences to all the families of the victims and express the hope that the people of Israel may finally bring this tragic episode to a close. Panama voted in this Council in favor of Resolution 2803 of 2025, convinced of the need to open a political space that would allow for the consolidation of the cessation of hostilities, facilitate humanitarian assistance, and lay the foundations for a phase of stabilization and transition in Gaza. This space provides an opportunity that we cannot afford to lose. We consider that the mechanisms provided for in that resolution, including the implementation of the peace plan and the Board of Peace, must be promoted in a coordinated manner and benefit from effective assistance by the United Nations, particularly by the Security Council, as the primary source of their legitimacy. We express our concern over recent incidents affecting UNRWA facilities, and we reaffirm the principle of the inviolability of United Nations premises, as well as the privileges and immunities of its personnel, which states are obligated to respect. We urge that non-governmental organizations that have accompanied the enormous humanitarian effort despite extreme conditions on the ground be allowed to continue their work unhindered in order to contribute to the successful conclusion of the peace plan. We reaffirm that the only sustainable and humane path is one that allows the peoples of Israel and Palestine to live side by side in peace, security, and dignity, hopefully in the near future. Furthermore, we observe with concern the disproportionate measures adopted by the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran in response to citizen demonstrations intended to express legitimate demands for freedom, arbitrary detentions, enforced disappearances, restrictions on freedom of assembly, and actions aimed at silencing the families of victims contravene international human rights obligations and reinforce the urgency of giving voice to the Iranian people and opening avenues towards engagement with the international community. With regard to Syria, Panama reaffirms its support for a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political transition process, emphasizing that lasting peace will only be possible through the inclusive integration of all minorities while respecting national sovereignty and the country's territorial integrity. We value the recent efforts of the interim authorities to prioritize containment and dialogue in Aleppo and its surrounding areas, and we reaffirm the obligation of all parties to comply with the January 19th agreement, respect international humanitarian law, and protect the civilian population. Likewise, Panama underscores that terrorism continues to pose a serious threat to peace and security in the region. We reiterate the need to prevent the reactivation of terrorist groups, to securely manage detention centers, and to ensure the responsible repatriation of foreign fighters. We also maintain particular attention on the situation in southern Yemen, where in recent weeks there has been an increase in tensions and clashes that severely affect security, stability, and the humanitarian conditions of the civilian population. In this context, we reiterate the need to prioritize a genuinely national agenda, and we underscore the central role that the Yemeni people themselves must play in decisions regarding their future and the governance of their country. Similarly, the situation in Lebanon continues to be characterized by high volatility. The visit carried out by this Council in December made it possible to observe the fragility of the current ceasefire, persistent tensions along the southern border, and the challenges associated with the implementation of Resolution 1701 of 2006. Panama reaffirms the importance of preserving stability along the Blue Line, fully respecting the mandate of the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, and strengthening support for the Lebanese armed forces as an essential pillar of the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We also recognize the women who, throughout the Middle East, from civil society and the political spaces they manage to occupy, are opening paths towards equality and justice, reminding us that there can be no peace or development without their full, safe, and meaningful participation. Mr. President, the future of the Middle East cannot be built behind the backs of its peoples. Neither models imposed from the outside nor the intransigence of political actors without legitimacy or popular support offer solutions to the complex challenges facing the region. The region's stability and its contribution to international peace and security will be the result of the sum of actions, which, though they may seem small, reflect the sacrifice of women and men who save lives, feed the most vulnerable, educate children, and choose peace over violence every day, bearing witness to the fact that the best future is one that is built on respect for difference. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Panama for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we thank the UN Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Remisa Alakbarov, for the briefing on the state of affairs in the region. The dynamics of the situation of recent days in the area of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict does give us grounds for cautious optimism and does give us hope for a definitive transition from the logic of confrontation and violence to diplomacy and economic revival. We welcome the return to Israel of the body of the last hostage, Ron Gvili. This became possible thanks to the transfer of information on his whereabouts by the Palestinians. The wounds inflicted on the Israeli nation on the 7th of October 2023 may still be fresh, but we do hope that this symbolic event, which marked the final reunification of all families with their loved ones, will lay a solid foundation for restoring relations between the two peoples. At the same time, should we under no circumstances forget about the Palestinians who lost loved ones or were separated from their relatives? In addition to more than 70,000 who died during the conflict, since the cessation of fire in October 2025, 710 bodies have been dug out from under the rubble of Gaza, and thousands remain there. And finding of each of them has no less significance for the Palestinian people and for the cause of reconciliation. We note the long-awaited start of the second phase of President Plan's peace plan, which the American side announced on 14th January. The launch of the work of transitional structures in the enclave, first and foremost, the National Committee on the Administration of Gaza, headed by the experienced PEA civil servant Ali Shahs, lays the foundation for restoring the sector. We are convinced that success in implementing the peace initiative is only possible provided there is strict respect for the interests and rights of the Palestinian people, and also provided there is close coordination of the temporary structures with the PA. We emphasize that it's inadmissible to have any plans for the forced relocation of the Gazans, no matter what plausible pretext they may be furnished with. We expect in the foreseeable future the restoration of the administrative, political, and economic unity of Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, within the framework of the Palestinian state within the 1967 borders. And we await from the American side more specifics regarding the prospects for the deployment in this sector of the international stabilization forces, including information on its composition, size, and the mandate of this mission. Based on the long-term experience of peacekeeping operations, we believe that the effectiveness of the ISF will directly depend on the presence of consent by the parties and the ability of the mission to impartially fulfill its mandated tasks. At the same time, the use of force must be strictly limited in order to avoid drawing the peacekeepers into the conflict as one of its sides. Overall, we believe that the future implementation of the peace plan will require the mediators to focus on finding a comprehensive negotiated solution to the problem of disarming Palestinian groups and withdrawing Israeli units from Gaza. Attempts to have a forceful solution here will lead to nothing. Mr. President, now, when the body of the last hostage has been returned, the Israeli side has no grounds left for any further delay in fulfilling its humanitarian obligations towards the Gazans. We would like to recall here that Israel's humanitarian obligations are in points 7 and 8 of Donald Trump's peace plan, as well as in operative paragraph 3 of UN Security Council Resolution 2803, which approved it, and where the importance of resuming full-scale delivery of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip through cooperating organizations, including the UN, is stated directly. This concerns, amongst other things, the need of fully opening the Rafah crossing, which was announced only on the 26th January, in other words, 3.5 months after the conclusion of the ceasefire agreement. Unfortunately, the humanitarian situation in Gaza continues to remain catastrophic under conditions of total destruction and restrictions on the delivery of cargo supplies. The continuing prohibitions in carrying out humanitarian operations and importing necessary goods, as well as equipment for clearing the rubble, seriously aggravate the situation of the Gazans. Palestinians continue to die under Israeli strikes, suffer from hunger, from the virtual absence of any medical assistance and access to education, to which now winter cold has been added. Since 10th of October 2025, about 500 people have been killed. At least 9 of them have died of hypothermia. Information coming from humanitarian organizations clearly shows the disproportion between the scale of humanitarian needs and the actual level of response to them. Moreover, there is serious concern about the trend towards further diminishing of humanitarian activity, including through the introduction by Israel of additional requirements for the registration of humanitarian NGOs. These NGOs account for a significant share of vital work. And it is precisely based on the acute needs and urgent requirements of the Palestinians that we announced our readiness to provide $1 billion from Russian assets, which were frozen by the previous U.S. administrations, for projects for restoration and reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. We call on Israel to refrain from actions undermining humanitarian response and to ensure that humanitarian structures can have safe and unimpeded access necessary to overcome the consequences of one of the most acute crises of our times. Mr. President, The situation surrounding UNRWA requires special attention. For decades, the agency has been playing a key and irreplaceable role in providing assistance to the Palestinian population, both in the OPT and in the neighboring Arab countries. The mandate of the agency was extended for yet another 3-year period until 30th June 2029 by UN General Assembly Resolution 80/78, for which an overwhelming majority of member states voted in favor. UNRWA also bears historic responsibility to assure the implementation of Resolution 194 on the right of Palestinian refugees to compensation and return. At the same time, today, the agency is facing unprecedented pressure and systemic obstacles to its activities. Unfortunately, UNRWA is forced to direct significant efforts not only to supporting those in need, but also to protecting its own staff from threats, from pressure, and from persecution. The Israeli side has prohibited the supply of electricity and water to UNRWA facilities, cancelled tax benefits and immunities from lawsuits, and the right to use banking and payment means. By the end of January, a forced disconnection of the agency's schools, clinics, and utility facilities from power and water supply systems will begin, and this will affect the provision of social services to tens of thousands of Arab residents of East Jerusalem. Since the beginning of the escalation of hostilities in Gaza, 309 UNRWA staff members have been killed, and we express our sincere condolences to their families and loved ones and call for an impartial investigation and bringing those responsible to justice. We note the recent statement made by the UN Secretary General with strong condemnation of Israel's anti-UNRWA course, including the demolition on the 20th January of the agency's headquarters, and we express concern over such unprecedented steps. We call on the Israeli leadership to reverse them and refrain from further unilateral campaign against a UN humanitarian entity and to observe its obligations as a UN member state. We recall the option contained in Secretary General's letter dated 8th of January regarding the referral of the issue to the International Court of Justice in case it's impossible to resolve the differences under the 1946 Convention of Privileges and Immunities of the UN bilaterally. Now, regarding Jerusalem, we note our commitment to Security Council resolutions 476 and 478 about its occupied status and on the non-recognition of Israelis' actions extending its sovereignty to the city. Mr. President, the position of our country in the Palestinian-Israeli settlement is principles and not subject to political changes. We reaffirm our support to the two-state formula and a just solution to the Palestinian problem on a universally recognized international legal basis, without which it is impossible to achieve genuine peace and lasting security in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We also join colleagues in thanking Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Mr. Ramiz Al-Akbarov, for his comprehensive briefing. And we welcome UN's continued commitment to remain engaged on the Palestinian question in all its aspects. Pakistan welcomes the convening of this open debate at a time when cautious diplomatic progress coexists with serious humanitarian situation and continued violations on ground in Gaza and the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory. Mr. President, the unresolved Palestinian question is at the core of the instability in the Middle East. Palestinian people have endured decades of illegal occupation, marked by dispossession, brutal repression, and the denial of their inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination. Over the past 2 years in Gaza, this suffering escalated to an unprecedented scale, resulting in widespread civilian casualties, mass displacement, almost total destruction of infrastructure, and severe humanitarian deprivation. Against this backdrop, the international community sought to re-anchor efforts towards diplomacy and a credible political pathway towards peace. Initiatives such as the high-level conference on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine held last July, as well as President Trump's 20-point peace plan, subsequently endorsed by the Security Council Resolution 2803, reflect this renewed engagement. In line with Resolution 2803, the commencement of the second phase of the peace plan, including the establishment of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza and the establishment of the Board of Peace and executive committees, are important steps. As intended in the plan, these measures should now help consolidate the ceasefire, secure a permanent cessation of hostilities, facilitate transitional arrangements, enable recovery and reconstruction, ensure the provision of humanitarian assistance at scale, and prepare the ground for a sustainable and credible political process towards Palestinian self-determination and statehood. However, we are deeply concerned that the fragile situation in Gaza remains under constant strain. Ceasefire violations continue unabated and civilian lives remain at risk. Increased pressure on international humanitarian organizations, including deregistration measures and restrictions on humanitarian operations, are impeding assistance and protection for the most vulnerable. We strongly condemn Israel's continued attacks on the UN premises and UNRWA, including the recent demolition of UN compound in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of occupied East Jerusalem. Such actions undermine the stabilization efforts and threaten the limited progress achieved so far. UNRWA's operations remain essential and must be safeguarded. Pakistan, together with other Arab and Islamic countries in the Group of Eight, has joined the Board of Peace in support of its mandate as endorsed by the Security Council Resolution 2803. In a joint statement, the foreign ministers of the group reiterated their support for the peace efforts led by President Donald Trump and reaffirmed their commitment to implementing the mission of the Peace Board as a transitional administration as set out in Comprehensive Plan to End the Gaza Conflict and endorsed by Resolution 2803, aimed at consolidating a permanent ceasefire, supporting the reconstruction of Gaza, and advancing a just and lasting peace grounded in the Palestinian right to self-determination and statehood in accordance with international law, thereby paving the way for security and stability for all countries and peoples of the region. To ensure that current initiatives deliver tangible results, Pakistan underscores the following priorities. First, globally, on the process and its objectives. We hope that the Board of Peace, under the framework of Resolution 2803, will lead to concrete steps towards the implementation of a permanent ceasefire, further scaling up of humanitarian aid, reconstruction of Gaza, and realization of the right to self-determination of the people of Palestine through a credible, time-bound political process consistent with international legitimacy and UN resolutions, resulting in an independent, sovereign, and contiguous state of Palestine based on pre-1967 borders, with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. That, Mr. President, is the ultimate goal supported by the international community. Palestinian-led governance and institutional strengthening, with a central role of the Palestinian Authority, are indispensable in this regard. Second, and specifically on ceasefire, full respect for the ceasefire must be ensured with a view to a permanent cessation of hostilities. Any military escalation, unilateral measures, or provocations must be strongly countered as they jeopardize civilian protection and undermine confidence building. Third, on the humanitarian situation, attacks on UN premises UNRWA, humanitarian organizations and personnel, and their facilities, as well as administrative restrictions on international organizations, are unacceptable and contrary to international humanitarian law. Full, safe, sustained, and unimpeded humanitarian assistance at scale must be ensured. UNRWA's role in this regard remains critical. Fourth, recovery and reconstruction. That should begin without delay, with no annexation, forced displacement, or alteration of the territorial unity of the occupied Palestinian territory. The contiguity of Gaza and the West Bank is indispensable for the viability of the Palestinian state. Fifth, illegal settlement activity, settler violence, and attempts to alter the demographic, legal, or historical character of the occupied territory, including the holy sites, must cease immediately. Israel, the occupying power, must also be compelled to immediately halt its illegal and destabilizing actions in Syria and Lebanon in violation of their sovereignty and territorial integrity and the relevant Security Council resolutions. Israel must completely vacate all occupied Arab territories. Sixth, accountability is indispensable. For without justice and respect for international law, there can be no durable peace. And finally, the political horizon. A credible, irreversible, and time-bound process culminating in the realization of Palestinian statehood in accordance with international legitimacy. All diplomatic initiatives, including President Trump's Gaza peace plan, a high-level conference on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine, and the Global Alliance for the Two-State Solution must reinforce one another through coordinated and concrete implementation. The international community, particularly this Council, bears the responsibility to translate renewed engagement into measurable change on the ground for the betterment of the Palestinian people. Pakistan's solidarity with the Palestinian people remains firm and unwavering. We stand ready to work with members of the Council, regional and international partners, and the United States to advance a just and lasting solution to the Palestinian question and a comprehensive peace in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Kingdom of Bahrain.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I'd like to express our gratitude to Your Excellency and the delegation of the Federal Republic of Somalia, and we congratulate you on your presidency of the Security Council this month. We thank Mr. Ramez Akbarov, the Deputy Peace Process Coordinator, for his briefing. We welcome the foreign ministers of Greece and Liberia with us today, and I welcome all of those taking part in this meeting. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain and the peoples of the Middle East and the entire world look forward to putting an end to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which has lasted for nearly 80 years and has inflicted heavy and irreparable losses in lives, property, capabilities, and infrastructure in the region. A conflict that has deprived successive generations of the opportunity to live in security, stability, freedom, and dignity in the absence of a just and lasting solution to the question of Palestine. The Kingdom of Bahrain firmly believes in the need for a discourse of peace and hope to prevail in the region and to provide a secure, stable, and sustainable environment to fulfill the rights of the brotherly Palestinian people to self-determination and the establishment of a sovereign and independent state side by side with the State of Israel, and in a manner that contributes to the promotion of peace, security, and prosperity that benefits all the peoples of the region and safeguards all international interests. This is done through using peaceful solutions to put an end through negotiation and through dialogue and diplomatic efforts. This meeting coincides with the commemoration of the International Day for Peaceful Coexistence, which my country, the Kingdom of Bahrain, initiated as a proposal to the United Nations. And this was based on our belief that the consolidation of a culture of dialogue and mutual respect and tolerance and coexistence among peoples is an indispensable basis for achieving a just and sustainable peace, especially in the region, a region that has long suffered from conflicts and struggles such as the Middle East. The Kingdom of Bahrain commends the positive initiatives that pave the way towards achieving a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace in the region. And we reiterate that we welcome the announcement of the start of the second phase of the comprehensive plan to end the conflict in Gaza under the auspices of His Excellency, U.S. President Donald Trump. We welcome the formation of the Palestinian National Committee for the Administration of the Gaza Strip as an interim transitional body. We wish this committee success in its duties in service of the Palestinian people and putting an end to their suffering and improving their living conditions. In this context, the Kingdom of Bahrain's signing of the Charter of the Peace Council in Davos upon the directives of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, the King of Bahrain. We signed this charter to welcome the invitation extended to His Majesty by the President of the United States to join the Peace Council, because the Kingdom believes in the importance of moving towards the full implementation of the peace plan on the Gaza Strip, in that it presents an international framework that supports the protection and safeguarding the legitimate rights of the brotherly Palestinian people and the achievement of a sustainable peace in the region. The Kingdom of Bahrain affirms its appreciation for the efforts made by the United States of America to put an end to the war and to establish a sustainable peace in the region. We express our hope that the Peace Council would contribute to promoting and supporting stability, development, and prosperity for all. The Kingdom of Bahrain also calls on all parties to work on ensuring the success of recent diplomatic efforts, especially the Trump peace plan. We emphasize the use of dialogue and negotiation as a means to address any obstacles or concerns. We stress the need to establish a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire in Gaza and facilitate the sustainable and adequate delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians in the Gaza Strip, and the need to start reconstruction and recovery there. In addition, we reject any attempt or any schemes to forcibly evict persons from the Palestinian territories or the settlement expansion, which is considered a violation of Security Council Resolution 2334 or anything that would harm the religious and historic status of the city of Al-Quds, Jerusalem, as a city that has throughout history encompassed the three divine religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in fraternity and in peace. And in this context, we affirm the outcomes of the 33rd Arab Summit, known as the Bahrain Summit, and the initiatives it launched, including a call for convening an international peace conference and intensifying diplomatic efforts aimed at increasing international recognition of the State of Palestine and supporting granting it full membership in the United Nations, and calling for the need to guarantee the right to education and health services to those affected by conflicts in the region. We also stress the importance of supporting all regional and international efforts aimed at alleviating the suffering of the brotherly Palestinian people, including relief efforts that the United Nations performs through the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, the UNRWA, to provide support and relief to millions of refugees in the Palestinian territories, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon until a just and comprehensive political solution is reached in a manner that guarantees their legitimate rights and in accordance with international law and international legitimacy resolutions. The Kingdom of Bahrain commends the positive steps taken by the Palestinian Authority, including its acceptance of the plan of His Excellency, the U.S. President, on Gaza, and Security Council Resolution 2803. We consider those a positive path towards a permanent and stable situation in the Gaza Strip as an integral part of the Palestinian state. The Kingdom of Bahrain welcomes the Palestinian Authority's intention to hold local elections in the West Bank and Gaza Strip on the 15th of April. We stress the importance of the democratic process and the participation of the Palestinian people in determining their future. In conclusion, the Kingdom of Bahrain reiterates its call on the international community to support the rights of the Palestinian people to establish their national independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with the two-state solution and relevant international legitimacy resolutions and to grant it full membership in the United Nations. We affirm the need to work to achieve a just, comprehensive, and sustainable peace in the Middle East, in accordance with all of the relevant United Nations resolutions, the most recent of which was Resolution 2803, the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, and here we stress the commitment of the Kingdom of Bahrain as a member of the Security Council to continue working with members of the Council and other concerned parties to support efforts aimed at guaranteeing the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people and to contribute effectively to the achievement of a just and lasting peace in the Middle East in a manner that preserves regional security and stability and maintains international peace and security and provides opportunities for prosperity for all the peoples of the region. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Kingdom of Bahrain and now give the floor the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, the Democratic Republic of the Congo would like to congratulate the Federal Republic of Somalia on the diligence with which you have led the work of the Security Council throughout the month of January, now ending, and for having taken the initiative to organize this quarterly debate on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. We welcome the presence in this room of the Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process and the presence of their Excellencies, Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Liberia and Greece. The Democratic Republic of the Congo remains concerned by the persistence of tensions and hotspots of instability across the Middle East, notably in Syria, in Yemen, or in Lebanon. The region is marked by the interweaving of political, security, and humanitarian crises, and the fragmentation of regional dynamics, the multiplication of armed actors, and the constant risk of escalation recalls for us that it's urgent to have a global, coherent approach found on respect for international law, so as to prevent any expansion of conflicts and to preserve regional peace and security. Mr. President, our remarks this morning will focus more on the Palestinian question, which is the epicenter of the crisis in the Middle East. This meeting of ours takes place 2 months after we saw the momentum consecrated by the adoption of Resolution 2803, and it provides the opportunity for the Council to consider at the beginning of the year 2026 the beginnings of a return to peace and stability in the Middle East, particularly in the Gaza Strip. The Council has, through its Resolution 2803, proposed a framework for an inclusive transition in Gaza, which constitutes an important step forward. The credibility of the Security Council will depend on its effective and transparent implementation. From the outset, the Democratic Republic of the Congo would like to salute the leadership of the United States of America and the actions of Qatar, the Arab Republic of Egypt, and the Republic of Turkey in the conclusion of the comprehensive plan, which is aimed at ending the conflict in Gaza, particularly for the efforts undertaken towards obtaining a ceasefire between the parties to the conflict. This historic advance certainly gives rise to hope for a positive dynamic in favor of population trapped by the war, but also leads us to recall once again the need to give preeminence to restrained dialogue and diplomacy as solution to crises, even the most acute crises. Likewise, the situation in Gaza recalls for us that without real political will and without sincere commitment and engagement, no de-escalation or any peace can be envisioned. Mr. President, the Democratic Republic of the Congo notes with satisfaction the advances on the political and diplomatic level when it comes to trying to resolve the crisis in Gaza. We welcome in particular the recent appointment of the members of the Board of Peace and the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. Nonetheless, we wish to draw the attention of the Council to the humanitarian situation in Gaza, which remains profoundly worrying. The protection of civilians, humanitarian personnel, and civilian infrastructure must remain an absolute priority in accordance with international humanitarian law. And despite a partial improvement in the delivery of aid, the needs there remain huge. The Democratic Republic of the Congo calls urgently for guaranteeing safe, rapid, and unimpeded humanitarian access, as well as greater financial support to sustain the United Nations humanitarian response. In this regard, we underline the need for having a constructive approach regarding the role played by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, and the security guarantees that need to be granted to the United Nations personnel as they implement their mandate, in particular those involving the protection of vulnerable civilian populations. Mr. President, in conclusion, the members of the Council have a collective responsibility here to ensure compliance with the ceasefire and to make sure that's transformed into lasting peace. They are called upon to remain united, vigilant, and engaged in order to accompany the parties towards real stability for the benefit of all of the peoples of the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo for his statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Deputy Special Coordinator Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov for his briefing. Mr. President, there are prospects for stability in the Middle East. The terrorist networks of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis have been severely degraded. The failed Iranian regime has been weakened. And its nuclear program has been set back decisively. The collapse of the Assad regime has brought relief to millions of Syrians and contributed to the wider stability of the region. As a fragile ceasefire in Gaza continues to hold, we must collectively engage in its consolidation. We need to build on this progress to end the immense human suffering of the Palestinian people and to provide them with opportunities to secure their daily livelihoods, reconstruct infrastructure, and regain their dignity and future. The people of Israel have to be assured that they can live in peace, security, and without the daily threat of terrorism. At last, 843 days since October 7, all of the hostages taken by Hamas are finally returned home. Our thoughts and prayers are with the Gwili family and all other families that endured this horror. Mr. President, Latvia supports the full implementation of President Trump's comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. It must serve as a building block for broader stabilization in the Middle East. We welcome the launch of Phase 2 of the comprehensive plan, which has commenced with the announcement of the Executive Board, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. We also welcome the work of the Civil Military Coordination Center. Further on, it is imperative that Hamas disarms and relinquishes power. We look forward to the Board of Peace in its transitional administration capacity, as endorsed by the Security Council Resolution 2803, to provide strategic oversight of the implementation of the comprehensive plan and redevelopment of Gaza for the benefit of its people. We also await the International Stabilization Force to be generated and to fulfill its security role. Mr. President, With the transitional governing bodies taking up their duties, there is a pathway for tangible reconstruction and development, with drinking water and food, as well as hospitals and schools to be accessible to everyone throughout Gaza. The Palestinian Authority has to be assisted in building institutional capacities, implementing its reform agenda, and addressing security challenges. Mr. President, the past 2 years have confirmed that breaking the cycle of violence requires sustained investment in a viable political solution. A peace that addresses the security concerns and the legitimate aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians. We should not lose sight of the objective of the two-state solution in accordance with international parameters as defined by Security Council resolutions and the New York Declaration endorsed last September. A just and lasting peace requires Gaza and the West Bank to be addressed as one unified entity. The unprecedented levels of violence, land confiscations, house demolitions, and settlement expansion that are emerging across the West Bank undermine international efforts aimed at achieving peace and stability in the region. We strongly oppose any steps towards territorial or demographic change in occupied Palestinian territories and urge Israel to halt its settlement policy in the West Bank. Mr. President, the ultimate value of any plan is determined not by its quality on paper, but by its effective and efficient execution in the real world. We commend the dedication and courage of humanitarian workers who, despite extremely difficult circumstances, have responded swiftly to the urgent needs of civilians in Gaza. The immediate flow of aid following the peace agreement last October provided a vital lifeline, and it should be continuously ensured without interruption or obstruction. Humanitarian needs remain immense and are further exacerbated by dire weather conditions, with most civilians still lacking access to shelter, clean water, and basic medical care. In this regard, the adoption of new registration requirements for international non-governmental organizations raises serious concerns about their potential impact on humanitarian assistance. Safeguarding and enabling predictable and non-discriminatory operating environment remains essential to ensure that this vital assistance can continue in line with international humanitarian and human rights law. We call on Israel to engage in meaningful dialogue with affected stakeholders. Mr. President, the situation in Iran has reached an alarming level of repression. The regime has killed thousands of innocent protesters. It continues to carry out mass repression and an attempt to silence protesters. Latvia stands in solidarity with the brave people of Iran. We demand an immediate end to the violent oppression of its people who are simply exercising their fundamental rights. Iran's ongoing support for armed proxies and its aggressive regional interventions undermine security and stability across the Middle East and beyond. The continued material support of the Iranian regime to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is despicable. Mr. President, we also take note of certain positive developments in the region that merit continued support from the international community. We welcome the Lebanese government's political commitment and efforts to foster economic recovery, reconstruction, and security, including steps taken to ensure the state's monopoly on weapons. We reaffirm our support to the implementation of the Security Council Resolution 1701 and the important role of UNIFIL. Emerging from decades of violence and grief, the new Syria has a historic opportunity to shape a future of peace, security, and prosperity for its people and neighbors. We welcome the efforts of Syrian transitional government to sustain security and advance an inclusive political transition and socioeconomic recovery. In conclusion, let me emphasize that at a time when there is a glimmer of hope for stability and lasting peace in the Middle East, the international community must strengthen its collective commitment to this goal. In doing so, we must focus on the needs of people and their aspirations for security and dignity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for his statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for convening this open debate. I thank the Special Coordinator, Ramiz Alakbarov, for his briefing, and I greet the delegations participating in this meeting. As Colombia is taking the floor for the first time as a member of this Council in a meeting devoted to the question of Palestine, Colombia reiterates its solidarity with the Palestinian people and its commitment to the realization of their inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination. Mr. President, more than 3 months have gone by since the launch of the first phase of the peace plan for Gaza. While discussions of a second phase are being announced, repeated and increasingly serious violations of the ceasefire persist, as do restrictions on humanitarian access imposed by Israel. These 3 months have seen survivors of the genocide in Gaza face the total destruction of their livelihoods, enduring the harsh conditions of winter while the occupying power keeps crossings closed, unjustifiably restricts the entry of goods essential for survival, and targets more than 37 humanitarian organizations that constitute the sole lifeline for millions of Palestinians. Added to this is the systematic use of torture and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, including sexual violence against detained Palestinians, among them women and children. These practices, documented by United Nations mechanisms, have intensified over the past 2 years and are committed in a context of near total impunity. The level of cruelty of these acts demands clear condemnation and immediate accountability. Meanwhile, the campaign of disinformation against the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East continues unabated. In addition to extremely serious attacks and the deliberate demolition and destruction of United Nations infrastructure at the UNRWA complex in Sheikh Jarrah, decisions adopted by the Knesset flagrantly contravene the privileges and immunities of the United Nations and disregard Israel's obligations under international law, as clearly stated by the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion of the 22nd of October 2025. Mr. President, we must not lose sight of the fact that peace and stability can only be built on principles, on justice, on accountability, and full recognition of the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. The only just and sustainable outcome is the two-state solution and the establishment of a sovereign, viable and contiguous Palestinian state within the pre-1967 borders. Under the current circumstances, this Council must be absolutely clear on the following. First, no armistice line may be interpreted as a redefinition of internationally recognized borders, and the annexation of territory, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank, is unacceptable. Second, the forced displacement of the population and the creation of ghettos are unacceptable and incompatible with international law and human dignity. Thirdly, respect for the principles of neutrality, independence and humanity in the delivery of humanitarian aid is non-negotiable, and the United Nations must remain at the center of the response, including through UNRWA. Access to basic services such as health, education, and food for the Palestinian population currently depends on the work of UNRWA and NGOs whose activities are being obstructed. Allow me, Mr. President, to now refer to the situation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, which continues to grow increasingly alarming. In recent months, we have witnessed an unprecedented escalation in settler violence, frequently encouraged by the Israeli authorities themselves and perpetrated with the acquiescence or protection of the occupying power's security forces. The accelerated expansion of settlements, the approval of new housing units by the Knesset, attacks on universities and civilian infrastructure, the deliberate suffocation of the Palestinian economy, and daily assaults on the lives and property of the Palestinian population leave no doubt as to the existence of a systematic policy aimed at making life impossible for Palestinians throughout the West Bank. This dynamic of de facto and de jure annexation undermines the possibility of the two-state solution. Mr. President, the persistence of the occupation and the absence of a just solution to the question of Palestine continue to have direct repercussions on regional stability. Although national efforts by Syria and Lebanon are evident, they are undermined by actions that violate their sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity. This Council must continue to support these national efforts, reiterating the urgency of implementing in its own resolutions in a consistent and effective manner, particularly resolutions 1559 and 1701. Before concluding, I would like to underscore a fundamental principle. The future of Palestine must be decided by the Palestinian people. New forms of protectorates or schemes of external administration that reproduce colonial logic are unacceptable, both in Palestine and elsewhere in the world. Self-determination is a cornerstone of this organization, and Colombia will continue to defend it. The Security Council bears the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and cannot relinquish its powers to opaque or partial mechanisms. We will continue to closely follow progress in the implementation of the second phase of the peace plan in accordance with what is authorized by Resolution 2803. We call for this Council to be kept informed in a timely manner and for the priorities and needs of the Palestinian people to be fully incorporated. It is our responsibility as Member States to ensure that the United Nations is an integral part of efforts to achieve a just, sustainable, and lasting peace in Palestine and throughout the Middle East region, a peace based on respect for life, international law, and human dignity. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Colombia for her statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Somalia. Excellencies, it's my honor in my capacity as the President of the Security Council to convene this high-level quarterly open debate on the Middle East. I welcome Her Excellency Ms. Sarah Baisolov Nayanti, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Liberia, and His Excellency Mr. Georgios Geropetraitis, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece, to the meeting. I also want to thank Special Coordinator Alakbarov for his valuable briefings. We meet As the Middle East faces an overlapping political, security, humanitarian, and socio-economic crisis, challenges whose effects are felt far beyond the region. The common thread running through this crisis is the urgent need for a sustained international engagement, renewed trust in multilateral diplomacy, and unwavering commitment to the Charter of United Nations. Let me begin with Palestine, where the ongoing tragedy in Gaza continues to shock the world's conscience. For years, civilians have endured relentless bombardment, mass displacement, and the collapse of essential services. The scale of destruction and catastrophic humanitarian conditions demand that this Council act with unity and resolve. Somalia stresses the international humanitarian law must be upheld fully without exception. The protection of civilians, humanitarian personnel, UN staff, and civilian infrastructure is a binding legal obligation. We reiterate the imperative of an immediate, comprehensive, and sustainable ceasefire and unhindered humanitarian access through multiple entry points. Just 2 days ago, the Council debated the rule of law among nations, a principle central to peace, security, and equality for all states. Yet, Israel has repeatedly violated these tenets without remorse or remedy. Its actions in Gaza, the West Bank, and beyond defy the international law, Security Council resolutions, and the most basic norms of the international system. This persistent impunity undermines not only justice in the Palestine, but also the credibility of this Council and the international order. Somalia is gravely concerned by Israel's escalating campaign against UNRWA, which remains vital for the survival and the dignity of millions of Palestinian refugees. UNRWA is not only a humanitarian actor, it's a lifeline delivering essential services to a population under occupation. Undermining UNRWA is a violation of humanitarian principles and abdication of Israel's responsibility as occupying power under the international law. Israel must ensure the welfare of Palestinian population, not obstruct or penalize those who provide critical support. We further condemn Israel's recent actions to recognize secessionist group in northwestern Somalia as an independent entity and reported plan to forcibly relocate Palestinians in the region in Somalia. Such actions are direct violation of Somali sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, and threatens the draw of Horn of Africa into the destabilized currents of the Middle East conflict. Attempts to impose new political realities on African continent set a dangerous precedent and erode the norms of international law and regional stability. The forced displacement of Palestinians from their homeland is unacceptable under international law. Any externally imposed scheme to relocate population or redraw borders will only deepen grievances, inflame tensions, and risk expanding the conflict. We are also deeply troubled by Israel's actions at the Holy Mosque in Jerusalem. Such provocations violate the sanctity of the world's most revered sites and threaten to ignite religious tensions across the region. Respect for religious sites is a fundamental obligation, and all parties must refrain from actions or rhetoric that endanger these sacred places and fragile coexistence they symbolize. The future of Gaza and the West Bank must be shaped by Palestinians themselves, restoring their political and territorial unity. Somalia reaffirms the two-state solution grounded in the relevant UN resolutions, and the Arab Peace Initiative and the New York Declaration remains the only credible framework for peace, justice, and security for Palestinians and Israelis. Turning to Lebanon, the situation along the Blue Line remains deeply concerning. Israel's violation of 1701 are a serious concern, and cross-border exchange and a constant risk of miscalculation threaten to drag the region into wider conflict. Somalia emphasizes the UNIFIL safety and freedom of movement must be respected at all times. The stability, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Lebanon are essential for regional equilibrium. In Syria, the consequences of conflict remain acute. The country faces political stagnation, humanitarian distress, and ongoing instability. Any unilateral measures or externally driven arrangement risk undermining Syria's unity and sovereignty, and humanitarian access must be safe, principled, and predictable. Resolution 2254 remains the only international agreed framework for the lasting settlement. We urge renewed commitment to Syrian-owned process that advance national reconciliation and safe voluntary return of the refugees. Repeated Israeli strikes inside Syria, which escalate tensions, must cease in line with international law. In Yemen, the reopening of Aden Airport, stabilization in parts of the south have improved access, but shifting control and continued detention of UN and humanitarian staff in the north are unacceptable and must end. Chronic underfunding threats, life-saving operations, Yemen's path to peace requires Yemeni-owned process grounded in established references. Stability comes when all parties honor their commitment and ensure weapons remain under state control. We reject against any attack on Yemen's sovereignty, territorial integrity, national unity, and independence. Regional dynamics involving Iran remain worrisome. Rising tensions across the maritime area, the land domains risk miscalculation and expanding conflict. Somalia underscores the urgent need for restraint, de-escalation, and respect for sovereignty. A structured regional dialogue grounded in non-interference and mutual respect is essential to stability. Across all these crises, one truth stands out. The Middle East challenges are deeply interconnected, and the common denominator is clear. Lasting peace and stability can only be achieved when all parties respect international law, uphold the responsibility, and embrace dialogue over confrontation. Fragmented responses will not yield sustainable solutions. Somalia urges coherent, principled engagement from this Council and renewed investment in political processes that put the aspirations and the dignity of the region's people at their core. In that context, the late U.S. President Jimmy Carter's commitment to peace shaped the region, notably through the Camp David Accords, and a breakthrough that proved dialogue and respect for agreement can replace conflict. I close excerpts from his book, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. I quote, "The bottom line is this: peace will come to Israel and to the Middle East only when the Israeli government is willing to comply with international law, with a roadmap of peace, with official American policy, with wishes of the majority of its own citizens, and honor the previous commitments by accepting its legal borders." End of quote. I now resume my function as the President of the Council. I wish to remind all speakers to limit their statements to no more than 3 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously. The flashing light on the microphone will prompt speakers to bring their remarks to a close after 3 minutes. I now give the floor to the representative of Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan.
شكرا.
Thank you, Mr. President.
At the outset, I would like to thank you for convening this important meeting, and I also thank the Deputy UN Special Coordinator for the peace process, Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov, for his valuable briefing. I also welcome the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Liberia and Greece in our meeting. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab Group. We meet today at a critical moment, more than 2 years after the war waged by Israel on the Gaza Strip. The Arab Group underscores the importance of Israel's commitment to the ceasefire agreement reached in October 25 and calls for an end to its violations and the full implementation of the ceasefire, all its phases and provisions. In this regard, the Arab Group appreciates the role played by the US President in reaching the ceasefire agreement, as well as the relentless efforts made by Egypt, Qatar, Turkey in achieving this agreement. We stress the importance of commencing the second phase of the agreement, moving toward the full implementation of President Trump's comprehensive plan and Security Council Resolution 2803. We further emphasize the importance of launching early recovery and reconstruction efforts throughout Gaza, and affirm that the future of the Gaza Strip must be based on its unity and reunification with the West Bank, with the Palestinian National Authority assuming its responsibility in Gaza, ensuring its unity with the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and enabling the Palestinian people to exercise the right to self-determination and independent statehood. The Arab Group condemns all Israeli military, political, legislative, and financial measures aimed at undermining the Palestinian Authority and calls on the international community to address such measures. Mr. President, the establishment of the Board of Peace and the Palestinian National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, both ad hoc transitional bodies created pursuant to Security Council Resolution 2803, must contribute to consolidating ceasefire, preventing displacement and annexation, ensuring Israel's full withdrawal from the Strip, supporting Gaza's reconstruction, and advancing a genuine political horizon that leads to the independence of a sovereign Palestinian state on the lines of 4 June 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital, and achieving a just and comprehensive peace in line with international legitimacy and the Arab Peace Initiative. The group stresses the need to compel Israel, the occupying power, to lift all restrictions and obstacles on the entry of humanitarian assistance and to open all crossings without selectivity or delay, ensuring aid reaches all parts of the Strip in compliance with the obligations under international law and relevant Security Council resolutions. Mr. President, the Arab Group reiterates its condemnation of all illegal Israeli policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory, including the continued expansion of settlements, home demolition, land confiscation, and settler tourism in the occupied West Bank. We emphasize that Israel has no sovereignty over the occupied West Bank or any part of occupied Palestinian territory. In this regard, the group values and commends the reaffirmation by the US President that Israel must not annex the West Bank. The group also welcomes the adoption by the General Assembly of its resolution endorsing the New York Declaration on the Palestinian statehood and the implementation of the two-state solution issued by the International Conference on Peaceful Resolution of the Palestinian Question, co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France. The group further stresses that East Jerusalem is an integral part of the occupied Palestinian territory and that Israel has no sovereignty over it. We emphasize the need for Israel to respect the historical and legal status quo at the Islamic and Christian holy sites. We affirm that the Jordanian Department of Jerusalem Awqaf and Al-Aqsa Mosque Affairs of the Jordanian Ministry of Awqaf, Islamic Affairs and Holy Sites is the sole legal authority with exclusive prerogatives to administer all affairs of Al-Haram Al-Sharif, including access under the Hashemite custodianship of the holy sites. The Arab Group also stresses the important role of the Jerusalem Committee and the Bayt Mal Al-Quds Al-Sharif Agency and supports all the committee's efforts. Mr. President, the Arab Group reaffirms the indispensable role of UNRWA in providing essential services to over 5.5 million refugees across its areas of operation, pursuant to its UN mandate. In this connection, we recall the advisory opinion of the ICJ in October 2025, which affirmed Israel's obligation to fully respect the inviolability and immunity of UN premises, including UNRWA. Accordingly, the Arab Group calls on the Security Council and the international community to assume their legal responsibilities and address Israeli decisions and violations targeting UNRWA, most recent of which the demolition of premises in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. The group also renews its call for the international community to provide the political and financial support necessary for the agency to continue its vital work. The group further condemns Israel's arbitrary measures against civil society and humanitarian organizations operating in the occupied Palestinian territory and calls for an end to these actions. Mr. President, in relation to Syria, the Arab Group condemns all Israeli attacks on Syria and incursions into its territory, which constitute a flagrant violation of international law and an act of aggression against Syrian sovereignty, which is a dangerous escalation that heightens tension and conflict. The group calls on the international community and the Security Council to act immediately to implement international law and compel Israel to cease its aggression and withdraw from all Syrian territories it occupies, in clear violation of the 1974 disengagement agreement. The group reiterates that the Syrian Golan is occupied Syrian territory and rejects Israel's decision to annex and impose its sovereignty over it. The Arab Group welcomes the efforts of the Lebanese government and the announcement by the Lebanese armed forces of the completion of Phase 1 of the weapons monopoly plan, consistent with Lebanon's administration determination to exercise full sovereignty over its entire territory by its own capabilities. We look forward to the international conference to support the Lebanese army and internal security forces to be held on 5 March and hosted by France, with the appreciated efforts of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, France, and the United States. The group condemns Israel's daily violations of Lebanon's sovereignty and of the Resolution 1701, including its continued occupation of 5 border sites in southern Lebanon and the establishment of so-called buffer zones inside the Lebanese territory. In conclusion, the Arab Group reaffirms that a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace is a strategic Arab choice. It remains the only path to this peace remains the establishment of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state on the 4 June 1967 lines, with East Jerusalem as its capital, in accordance with established terms of reference, the Arab Peace Initiative, and relevant international legitimacy resolutions. Thank you.
Jordan for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since 1947, the question of Palestine has remained on the United Nations agenda, making it the longest-running issue before this organization. It is not merely a territorial dispute, but a defining political and moral issue whose resolution remains essential to peace and stability in the Middle East. The Philippines welcomes the cessation of hostilities in Gaza and the progress achieved under the comprehensive plan endorsed by the Security Council in Resolution 2803. After 2 years of devastating conflict and immense civilian suffering, the ceasefire offers an opportunity to stabilize a situation that has long threatened international peace and security. At the same time, the ceasefire remains fragile, making immediate and sustained Council attention to the implementation of the Gaza peace plan as essential. In this regard, the Philippines wishes to underscore the following. First, humanitarian conditions in Gaza remain critical. While access has marginally improved, civilians continue to face severe food insecurity, widespread displacement, and the collapse of essential services, further aggravated by winter conditions. Free, safe, and unimpeded humanitarian access must be ensured without delay. In this connection, due to recent developments in East Jerusalem, we are deeply concerned over the ability of the United Nations to provide the necessary humanitarian assistance so urgently needed by the Palestinian people, especially in Gaza. Secondly, the Philippines welcomes the UN Security Council Resolution 2803 on the implementation of the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. We note that the resolution calls upon member states and international organizations to work with the Board of Peace to identify opportunities to support the reconstruction of Gaza, and for the World Bank and other financial institutions to facilitate and provide financial resources to support the reconstruction and development of Gaza, including through the establishment of a dedicated trust fund. Thirdly, stabilization and reconstruction should lead to a long-term and credible political horizon. The Philippines thus reaffirms its support for the two-state solution as the only viable and lasting path to peace. We support renewed diplomatic efforts, including the New York Declaration and the Global Alliance to advance lasting peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, as a committed partner, pathfinder, and peacemaker, the Philippines stands ready to work with the Council and other members of the international community to work towards a just and lasting peace in the Middle East. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Philippines, and I now give the floor to the representative of Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this meeting, and we also thank all briefers for the valuable briefing. Indonesia aligns ourselves with the statements to be delivered on behalf of the OIC, the Non-Aligned Movement, the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, and the core group of the Shared Commitment of UNRWA. In my national capacity, allow me to make the following statement. Indonesia reiterates our unwavering commitment to a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace in the Middle East, with the peaceful resolution of the question of Palestine at the center. While collective support for the peaceful resolution continues to grow, the reality on the ground stands in painful contrast. We deplore ongoing violence in Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, that undermines prospect for peace. We all understand that violence will only beget more violence. It is therefore our collective duty to take decisive action to end this catastrophe, ensuring the two states can live side by side in peace and security within their own sovereign and independent territories in accordance with internationally agreed parameters and relevant UN resolutions. To this end, Indonesia underscores three urgent priorities. First, any peace plan should aim towards a peaceful, just, and lasting solution. The effectiveness of the second phase of the comprehensive peace plan must be ensured to bring humanitarian assistance on the ground. Indonesia welcomes the establishment of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, and our decision to join the Board of Peace with other countries of the Group of 8 is based on our clear commitment to preserving the two-state solution and continue to be guided by Security Council Resolution 2803. This led me to my second point, preserving the centrality of the Security Council. As the custodian of international peace and security, the responsibility to advance and safeguard an effective peace process remains with this Council. The Council must remain seized to ensure that all efforts and processes remain anchored in UN Charter and international law. This requires the Council to exert its leadership through consistent monitoring for compliance and ensuring UN agencies and UN-led humanitarian efforts serve as an integral part of the peace process. Third, protection of civilians, cessation of violence, and unimpeded humanitarian access are prerequisites for credible political horizon. These are not optional, these are legal obligations. We are therefore gravely concerned on the continued attacks on UNRWA, a blatant violation of international law, including the Convention of Privileges and Immunities of the UN and the ICJ advisory opinion in October 2025, which will deprive millions of civilians of much-needed life-saving assistance. This Council must be able to move beyond condemnation and rise to its responsibilities to halt all violence and violations of international law, to bring a genuine political momentum and create a just and lasting peace. Mr. President, Indonesia continues to reaffirm our principled position that the entire peace process must lead to end illegal occupation of the Palestinian territory and achieving the two-state solution. This is key to lasting peace in the Middle East. The international community must act with unity, resolve, and moral clarity to ensure that peace, justice, dignity, and humanity prevail. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Indonesia for his statement. There is still a number of speakers remaining on the list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of the members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until 3 p.m. today. The meeting is suspended.